Hello, and welcome to Comics Coda. I'm a bag, and this is my YouTube channel where I talk about comics I've read, and I compose music based on comics that I love. First off, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone that has subscribed already, as the channel recently hit its first milestone of 100 subscribers. Last year, I posted several videos here and on TikTok that got a lot of positive reception. I'm hoping to gain some better momentum in 2023 and provide the online comics community with some fun original content. So once again, thank you all so much, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I figured a great way to jumpstart this journey would be to show you all my collection. I started collecting around 2018 and promised myself for the longest time that I'd stick mostly to independent titles, primarily from Image, Vertigo, Dark Horse, etc. With the DC Infinite app being super affordable, less than $10 a month, I didn't think it made a whole lot of sense to buy a bunch of DC books. But as you'll see, last year I caved and really tried to get everything in Batman continuity post-Crisis on Infinite Earths to now. So 1986 through present day. For the most part, my collection is organized by publisher, then alphabetically by author last name, then alphabetically by title. And then of course my Batman DC books, which are currently organized chronologically. I've picked up a few titles that I haven't worked into that order, which you'll see in a bit. So without further ado, let's check out my shelves. Can we bring up the monitor? No, the other monitor. No, the other monitor. Thank you. These three shelves are my pride and joy, the Vertigo deluxe editions. I've got just about all of them, save for a couple I don't want, so the only two I'm really missing are We 3 by Grant Morrison and Day Tripper. I do have Day Tripper in Absolute though. I've also considered picking up the newer Sandman deluxe editions to add to this collection, but I've got the Absolutes already and the new deluxes don't have the Vertigo logo anyway. So in this section I feel like the big standouts are Why the Last Man and Fables. These Why the Last Man books were the first collected editions I ever bought, and it's the series that really turned me on to comics back in 2011. I've upgraded to the Absolutes, but since these are my first comics ever, there's some sentimental value and they go well with all the other deluxes anyway. Not long after finishing Y, I used to see Fabled deluxes at my local comic store. I never bought any for years, but finally decided to, and it's a great series. Moving on, we've got my Rick Remender section. These are separate from my other Image books that you'll see because they're much taller, the same trim size as an Absolute from DC or a library edition from Dark Horse. I do have that one Dark Horse library edition of Gigantic here too, just for space, and it's still by Remender, and then Prince of Cats on the other side. I've read the first half of all the multiple volume series here. As soon as Deadly Class Volume 4 comes out later this year, I'm planning on a mega Rick Remender readathon. So hopefully I can make some music for some of those books if inspiration strikes. Next up are some extra large books. I'm surprised at how well Invader Zim comics capture the tone and comedy of the original TV series, and I basically use these in small doses as a fun palate cleanser if I'm reading something too serious or heavy like The Boys or anything by Ed Brubaker. The Sixth Gun is fantastic as well. I keep my Harry Potter illustrated editions down here too, and the fifth book just came out, which is exciting, but the illustrator Jim Kay has announced that he won't be continuing for books 6 and 7. So we'll see how long it takes before we get the final two books. So next we can move over to the Dark Horse library editions. Before those, I've got the Boys Omnibus set from Dynamite, but after that everything here is Dark Horse. I've really enjoyed these books, especially Lady Killer. I think Black Hammer Volume 1 is great, but the second one sort of lost me. World of Black Hammer is a mixed bag, and I'm not sure if I'll hold on to these or not. Harold Crowney is great just for the art, and ironically I might pick up World of Black Hammer Volume 4 just because it's the same artist, even though I just said I might get rid of the set. Go Team Venture is an art book that details designs and musings from the Venture Bros series creator for every episode through season 6. It is a must for any fan of the show, which you should be. Okay, so now we have Hellboy, which I shamefully have not read yet, and American Gods, which, same thing. I have the Umbrella Academy Slipcase Library editions, and would love to reread them eventually, because it's a series that moves a little too fast in my opinion. So I'd like to read it again and kind of fill in some of those blanks. The Massive is the first comic book I've read that features a Sri Lankan character, and it's also just a great series. Okay, while we're on the tall books, here are my Absolutes. While I can see myself getting rid of some of the DC books in my collection someday, I think I'd never part with these Absolutes, except for Superman for Tomorrow. It was just okay, but I snagged it for like $15, so whatever. There's Day Tripper, like I said earlier when we were looking at the Vertigo deluxes. Preacher and Sandman are two of the most beautiful Absolute editions DC has ever made, and I'm so happy that all of my editions have the original Vertigo logo on the spines, rather than the new DC Vertigo or DC logo. I won't show the interior since there's a ton of videos out there already, but basically they're like fake leather, and on the next shelf we have the rest of the Absolutes. I had to buy Swamp Thing Volume 1 twice since my first copy had bad binding, which was notorious for that particular volume. But it worked out anyway since they changed the spine logo from DC Vertigo to just DC, and it matches the other two volumes in the set. Transmetropolitan and Why the Last Man round out the Absolute sections as two of my favorite series of all time. Okay, so over to my thinner shelves we have Image Comics Deluxes. But first, on top of that, I have the slipcase box hardcover edition of Tintin. I grew up on this series, and while this version has smaller pages than the original trim size, it's still fun to have. It was a gift, and I'm really thankful to have it in my collection. Okay, Image Comics. First shelf is primarily all Brubaker. I need to do a read-through of Criminal, but the Fade Out, Fatale, Killer Be Killed, and Pulp are all great. I think Killer Be Killed is getting a reprint soon. I also have the standard hardcovers for Reckless on a different shelf. Next shelf has Sex Criminals, which I did 2 tracks in one video for the channel recently. I've also got Postal here and East of West. I've done like 6 or 7 neat tracks for East of West, but I've only published the intro title track I made for it on this channel. So let me know if you'd like to hear more of those on the channel in the future. I'm excited to read all of Oblivion Song by Kirkman, but can't confirm that they'll stay in the collection, as I read all of The Walking Dead once and sold off my compendiums for space. And also I just didn't see myself rereading The Walking Dead, so don't hate me. On the next shelf we have Murder Falcon, which I made a video for, but I haven't posted it yet. And then we have some of Jeff Lemire's books. I love Jeff Lemire's more human stories that are character-driven. Descender and Royal City work really well. I have a song I made for Gideon's Falls on this channel, so you can check it out, but the series kind of lost its edge toward the end compared to some of his other works. My Brian K. Vaughan section. So I told you about Why the Last Man. Well, that was written by Vaughan, and he really deserves all the credit he gets. All of his books are solid, and Paper Girls and Saga are no exception. Can't wait for a volume 4, 5, and 6 to complete Saga if they ever finish the single issues. I'm working on a Beatles-esque track for Ice Cream Man, which if you've read the series, you'll know why. And of course Middle West and Lock and Key are both great young adult stories. I feel that they're pretty mature, but the art deceives you into thinking otherwise. So I sandwiched the Flintstones in here next to my Sandman Universe omnibuses on the next shelf. I read Lucifer a couple months ago and loved it. So with that, I'm glad that I just got the Books of Magic Volume 3, so I can finally dive into that series and read it straight through. Circling back to the Flintstones, I've got a mini review of it on the channel if you'd like to know more. It's really not what you think it is, and that's all I'll say about that. Finally, the last shelf before we get into my DC proper books. If you like Preacher, the same creative team worked on a Hellblazer run, which is collected in this omnibus, so I'd recommend it on that basis alone. I'm waiting for my Volume 5 of Immortal Hulk to come so I can reread Volumes 1 through 3. I'm a bit nervous as apparently 4 and 5 dip in quality compared to the first 3, which were stellar. I don't really buy any Marvel as a rule of thumb, but this series got absolutely crazy reviews, and I was really into some horror-adjacent titles at the time. So other than that and Tom King's Vision series, that's all I have for Marvel. Sorry, Marvel fans. And now, my mostly chronological Batman section. There's obviously some stuff in here in the wrong place, so don't judge too hard, but feel free to comment down below if I can order any of the books better when I upgrade my shelves. So, in 2022, I read a bunch of the main DC events, starting off with Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's a bit too dated for my tastes, and I don't think it holds up as well as most say it does. But for the sake of receiving my imaginary PhD as a post-crisis DC Universe historian, I couldn't skip the inciting incident that really set DC in a new direction. And following that are some standard Batman deluxes. I read all of No Man's Land in 2022, and I think it definitely deserves the omnibus treatment. But it makes me wish we could get some more Batman omnibuses from DC soon, so let me know which ones you'd like to see in the comments. I don't know why, but DC 1 Million was honestly a ton of fun, even if the ending went a bit off the rails. Infinite Crisis is probably one of DC's most cohesive events, where all of the miniseries actually matter to what eventually happens in the end, especially compared to Final Crisis. I've seen others say Identity Crisis is bad, but I think it's one of the better stories I read during my events read-through. My only issue is that it underutilizes some of its female characters when they really should have been at the forefront of some of the conversations held within that book. I think if it had been written today, it would have elevated it to the next level with better representation for some of those characters. But ultimately, it is a solid story and makes me want to pick up Meltzer's Justice League run, which is also available in deluxe. The Grant Morrison run. This is really what did it for me. This 3-volume set is what kickstarted my journey into way too many DC books. They were heavily discounted and I think even buy 2 get 1 free on Amazon, so here we are. I've got the 3rd volume on the end since I think you should read the New 52 Batman before some of the spoilery things that happened toward the end of that final volume of the Grant Morrison run. And then also Final Crisis is here. My goal was to make it from Crisis on Infinite Earths to Final Crisis in 2022, along with a bunch of the other reading that I was doing all of last year, and I'm happy to say that I did it. That said, Final Crisis felt very disjointed in terms of the tie-in stories, as I mentioned earlier. I think I might prefer a deluxe edition of this, or I'll just have to reread the main 7 issues within the book again without the tie-ins to see if it's a better cohesive story without some of those tie-ins. Next up we have another Batman shelf with Batman and Robin by Tomasi and Gleason, which is my personal favorite Batman series. Tomasi just nails the father-son dynamic between Batman and Damian Wayne, the 4th Robin. I've also got Rise and Fall of the Batman, which is another recommended book from me, and I'm hoping that DC will put out a couple Tom King omnibuses now that the Batman Catwoman miniseries is completed. On the bottom shelf, I've got some random books. I know Multiversity should go before Rebirth, but this is just how they fit on this kind of shelf. Other than that, I've got all the Prestige Plus magazine size DC Black Label books, except for Superman vs. Lobo. And there's a few not on here, but more on that later. Okay, jumping back to the other shelves, here are my final DC books. I've got some Swamp Thing books with the New 52 one next to Animal Man, since they share an event called Rot World. And behind the deluxe edition of Swamp Thing from Scott Snyder are my standard size copies of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. I have these even though I have the absolutes because the coloring is completely different and in my opinion drastically changes the tone of the series. So let me know if you'd like to see a video comparing the 2 colorings. Other than that, I loved the Flash Omnibus for the art alone. While the New 52 gets dogpiled on a lot by longtime DC fans, it was my jumping on point for DC, and a big part of that was just how diverse the art styles were during that era. That time period really moved away from the sort of generic superhero style that solidified itself in the 90s and lasted a couple decades. If you only read superhero stuff and want to see just how different art can be, I think The Flash is a great starting point. Aquaman is just a fun ride and a fast read. I think it's a little bit overhyped, but still worth checking out as a fun adventure title. So this is my New 52 Bat Family section, which I've kept separate from the main Batman chronological shelf, mostly for space reasons, but I'd like to eventually integrate them all into that same timeline. Even though I have yet to read the Red Hood series, I'm really bummed DC hasn't made a volume 2 yet, just for the sake of completing it. Before jumping heavily into the DC events, I was reading the entirety of Scott Snyder's Batman in mid-2022, and I didn't want to spoil too much of that series, so I've held off on reading a few of these other than what I've already read when they first came out 10 years ago. I picked up the Green Lantern Omnis at a good price because they were used. In general, I think Johns is a bit overrated, but I will say that his Green Lantern run really deserves a lot of its praise. I enjoyed Grant Morrison's Superman run, but think that you should read some of his other titles beforehand to get a feel for his nonlinear style of storytelling. Death of Superman Omnibus was cool to read, but it is a little bit dated. There's a new deluxe that has just the main story that I've thought about maybe downsizing to and then integrating into my Batman section. Behind Superman for all seasons, I've got some random Superman books, including the Tomasi and Gleason Superman Omnibus that matches their Batman and Robin one. And they basically prove that you can catch lightning in a bottle twice with this book. They just know how to do the father-son thing so well, and here they do it with Superman and his son John Kent. Super Sons is mostly fun and a good sort of encore to their Batman and Robin and Superman books, and at the very end I have Secret Identity, which I highly recommend. So I need to upgrade my shelves to a different system in 2023, and I haven't quite gotten everything I need to figure that out yet. So until then, here are some books that I haven't found a place for on my shelves just yet. This stack is the last 4 of the Black Label Prestige Plus volumes that I have. Catwoman Lonely City is by Cliff Chiang, whose art on Paper Girls absolutely blew me away. It just came out, so I'm very excited to check it out soon. I usually hold off on these Prestige Plus books until a few come out, and then I'll read them back to back on a Saturday, like a fun DC Elseworlds mini readathon. I picked up American Vampire at the end of 2022, which feels like a long time coming. I've only been to a Comic-Con once back in 2010, and I remember getting a free poster for this series and putting it in my room. I remember being intrigued seeing Stephen King's name on the poster, and then years later thinking back, Scott Snyder has become a superstar himself in the world of comics. These are some DC books. JLA was fun, but has like 300 pages or something that double dip with the DC 1 million Omnibus. I kind of wish they had just left the whole section out of this volume, but whatever. And finally, this stack of DC events. So obviously I've read 0 Hour and 52 since they come before Final Crisis, but I still need to read Blackest Night and Brightest Day, which technically I've read as part of the Jeff Johns Omnibus, but this is the entire event collected. So they'll be the next events in the list of reading that I'm doing if I don't take a break to read some other non-DC books. So that's it, my whole comic book collected editions library tour. I hope you liked what you saw and got some good recommendations and an idea of what my interests are. Please support the channel by liking, commenting, and sharing this video, as well as subscribing and turning on the notification bell. I'm hoping to reach 1,000 subscribers as my next goal. And please let me know what other comics you'd like to see music made for here at Comics Coda. Thanks everybody! Heard an armor that one.